Emma pulled her coat tighter around her as the wind cut through the night like a knife. The streets were eerily silent, the kind of quiet that only came with a winter storm. The snow underfoot squeaked with each step, muffled by the thick blanket that coated the ground. Lampposts cast dim halos through the swirling flurries, but the visibility was so poor that Emma could barely make out the outline of the building she had passed hundreds of times before. She shivered, not just from the cold, but from the oppressive weight of the night. It was the kind of cold that reached into your bones, a biting chill that made every breath feel sharp and every movement a test of endurance. She glanced at the thermometer on the corner of the hardware store. -22 degrees Fahrenheit. She shook her head in disbelief. It wasn't just cold, it was dangerous. Her thoughts were focused on getting home as quickly as possible when she heard it. A sound so faint it could have been the wind. Emma froze mid-step, tilting her head to listen. It came again, a soft, high-pitched cry, almost imperceptible under the howling gusts. She turned in a slow circle, scanning the area. "Hello," she called out, her voice barely carrying over the storm. There was no response, only the relentless wind. Then she heard it again, louder this time. A weak, desperate meow. Emma's heart jolted. She didn't know where the sound was coming from, but she couldn't ignore it. She stepped off the sidewalk, her boots sinking into the deep snow as she moved toward the source. The cry grew louder, tugging at her heartstrings with every step. It was a sound filled with despair, and Emma's chest tightened as she imagined what kind of creature could be out here in this brutal weather. She reached a small park, its benches and trees almost invisible under the heavy snow. The meow came again, and Emma's eyes darted toward a low mound near a bench. Kneeling down, she brushed the snow away with gloved hands, her fingers stiff from the cold. Beneath the snow, a patch of black fur came into view. Emma gasped, her pulse quickening as she uncovered more. 3 tiny kittens lay huddled together in a shallow hollow, their fur crusted with ice and their bodies motionless except for the faintest rise and fall of their tiny chests. "Oh my God," Emma whispered, her voice trembling. She reached out hesitantly, afraid they might shatter like fragile glass under her touch. Their fur was stiff with frost, and their little paws were curled tightly against their bodies. One of them let out another weak cry, its mouth barely moving. Emma's mind raced. She had no idea how they had ended up here or how long they had been in the snow, but she knew they wouldn't survive much longer. Her hands shook as she pulled off her scarf and gently wrapped it around the kittens. "It's okay, I've got you," she murmured, her voice breaking. Tears stung her eyes as she realized how close they were to death. She pressed the bundle of kittens against her chest, trying to share what little warmth she could. Her breath came out in frantic puffs as she stood and looked around, searching for any sign of help. The park was empty, and the storm showed no signs of letting up. She would have to act quickly. Emma's house was too far, and she didn't have the resources to care for them herself. There was only one option, the veterinary clinic. It wasn't far, but every second counted. Adjusting her hold on the kittens, she broke into a run, her boots slipping on the icy pavement as she made her way back to the main road. The kittens didn't make a sound as she ran, their silence weighing heavily on her. "Stay with me," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Just hold on a little longer." She wasn't sure if she was talking to the kittens or herself. When she reached the clinic, her legs were trembling from the cold and exertion. The lights were still on, a beacon of hope in the storm. Emma didn't hesitate. She threw open the door, the sudden warmth of the clinic washing over her like a wave. "Help," she called out, her voice echoing in the small waiting room. "Please, I need help." Dr. Harper appeared from the back, his face etched with concern as he took in Emma's frantic state. "What happened?" he asked, already moving toward her. Emma unwrapped the scarf slightly, revealing the kittens. "I found them in the park," she said, her voice shaking. "They're frozen. I don't know how long they've been out there." Dr. Harper's expression hardened with determination. "Come with me," he said, leading her into the treatment room. Emma followed, clutching the fragile bundle as if her own life depended on it. As she laid the kittens on the examination table, Emma's heart ached at the sight of their tiny, fragile bodies. Their fur was matted with frost, and their whiskers were tipped with ice. She held her breath as Dr. Harper began his work, her hands clasped tightly in front of her as if in prayer. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Please let them live." Dr. Harper didn't waste a second. With a sharp nod to his assistant Lucy, who had just entered the clinic after hearing Emma's cries, he took charge of the situation. "Heat the incubator," he instructed briskly, his hands already moving to examine the kittens. "We need warm saline drips, blankets, and a heat lamp." "Go now." Lucy, a young vet technician with quick reflexes and a calm demeanor, sprang into action. Emma stood frozen near the doorway, her breath still coming in short, panicked gasps. Dr. Harper glanced at her, his voice softening slightly. "Emma, you did the right thing bringing them here, but we'll need every second if we're going to save them." Emma nodded, her throat too tight to speak. She stepped closer, her eyes locked on the 3 tiny kittens lying motionless on the steel table. Their fur, still frozen in patches, shimmered faintly under the fluorescent lights. She could barely hear the faintest of breaths escaping their tiny noses. The sight of their stillness sent a wave of despair washing over her, but she forced herself to stay upright, to stay hopeful. Dr. Harper gently placed a stethoscope against the first kitten's chest, his face impassive as he listened. He moved quickly to the next, and then the last, his brows furrowing deeper with each passing second. "They're hypothermic," he said, addressing Lucy as she returned with the supplies. "We'll need to raise their body temperature slowly, or we'll risk shocking their systems." Lucy nodded and immediately set to work preparing the incubator. The machine let out a soft hum as it came to life, its interior filling with a gentle, warm light. Meanwhile, Dr. Harper began to rub the kittens' tiny bodies with a towel, his motions firm but careful, trying to stimulate circulation. Emma watched as his hands moved with practiced precision, her heart clenching with each passing moment. The smallest kitten, a delicate orange tabby, remained eerily still. Emma couldn't take her eyes off it, her heart sinking as she noticed its tiny paws curled inward, as if it had given up. Is it too late?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Dr. Harper didn't look up, his focus unwavering. "It's never too late until we've tried everything," he said, his tone resolute. "But this little one will need a miracle." Lucy approached with the warm, saline drips, her hands steady as she prepared a catheter for the gray tabby, the largest of the kittens. "We'll start with him," she said, glancing at Dr. Harper for confirmation. He nodded, and Lucy gently inserted the catheter, the kitten letting out a weak, pitiful meow that made Emma's chest ache. "That's a good sign," Dr. Harper said, his voice slightly lighter. "If he's responding to touch, he's got a fighting chance." Emma's hand flew to her mouth as tears welled in her eyes. The gray kitten's small body began to shiver slightly as the warmth from the saline spread through him. It wasn't much, but it was movement, a sign of life. Dr. Harper and Lucy exchanged a brief, hopeful glance before moving on to the black and white kitten. This one seemed a bit stronger, its tiny chest rising and falling a bit more noticeably than the others. As Lucy worked to insert the next catheter, Dr. Harper focused on the smallest kitten, his expression growing more serious. "We need to get this one into the incubator immediately," he said. "Its core temperature is dangerously low." Emma stepped forward instinctively. "What can I do? Tell me how I can help." Dr. Harper looked at her, his sharp blue eyes softening. "Hold this kitten," he said, handing her the black and white one carefully. "Keep it close to your chest. Your body heat will help while we work on the others." Emma cradled the tiny creature against her chest, her hands trembling. The kitten's fur was still damp and cold, but she could feel the faintest flicker of life in its tiny body. She sat down on a nearby chair, rocking gently as if the motion might comfort it. "You're going to be okay," she whispered, her tears soaking into her scarf. "I promise." Meanwhile, Dr. Harper placed the smallest kitten into the incubator, adjusting the temperature settings and positioning it carefully on a soft blanket. He turned on the heat lamp and began gently rubbing the kitten's paws and ears, trying to stimulate blood flow. Lucy brought over a syringe with glucose solution and handed it to him. "This might help," she said, "if we can get it to swallow." Dr. Harper carefully placed a drop of the glucose solution on the kitten's lips, his hands steady as he waited for a response. At first, nothing happened. Emma held her breath, her heart pounding painfully in her chest. Then, slowly, the kitten's tiny tongue flicked out, lapping at the sweet liquid. "He's responding," Dr. Harper said, a hint of relief in his voice. "It's not much, but it's a start." Lucy continued to monitor the other two kittens, checking their heart rates and adjusting their saline drips as needed. The gray tabby let out another faint meow, its body twitching slightly as it began to warm up. The black and white kitten in Emma's arms stirred, pressing its tiny nose against her scarf. Emma let out a shaky laugh, a spark of hope igniting in her chest. "They're fighters," she said softly, looking up at Dr. Harper. "Aren't they?" Dr. Harper gave her a small, reassuring smile. "They are, but we've still got a long way to go." For hours, the team worked tirelessly, their movements synchronized as they fought to save the kittens. The incubator hummed steadily, its warmth cradling the smallest kitten as it clung to life. Lucy checked the oxygen levels, adjusting the flow for the tiny creature's fragile lungs. Emma stayed close, her presence a quiet but powerful reminder of why they were fighting so hard. As the night wore on, the storm outside began to subside, the wind dying down to a gentle whisper. Inside the clinic, the air was filled with quiet determination and the faint, hopeful sound of tiny meows. The stillness of the clinic weighed heavily on Emma as she sat by the incubator, her eyes fixed on the smallest kitten. The orange tabby hadn't stirred since being placed inside. Its tiny body, so delicate and fragile, looked impossibly small against the soft blanket lining the incubator. Dr. Harper had done everything he could, warming pads, glucose solution, and even gentle massages. But the kitten remained motionless. Emma pressed her hands to the glass of the incubator, her heart aching. "Come on, little one," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You've made it this far. Don't give up now." Tears blurred her vision, but she refused to look away. She had brought them here. She had to believe they could all survive. Dr. Harper approached quietly, his face solemn. He placed a comforting hand on Emma's shoulder. "Sometimes," he said softly, "their bodies are just too weak to recover from this kind of trauma. We're doing everything we can." Emma turned to look at him, her eyes pleading. "Isn't there anything else? Some kind of treatment? I'll pay for it, whatever it takes." He shook his head gently. "It's not about the cost. It's about time. Hypothermia affects the heart, the organs. Sometimes the damage is just too severe." He hesitated, glancing back at the incubator. "But I've seen miracles happen before. Let's give it a little longer." Emma nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. She refused to give up hope, even as the hours dragged on. The other two kittens were showing signs of recovery. The gray tabby had begun to move its tiny legs, stretching them out as if testing its newfound warmth. The black and white kitten had nestled against Emma's chest earlier, its soft purring like a balm to her frayed nerves. But the orange tabby remained still. Lucy entered the room, holding a cup of steaming coffee. She handed it to Emma, offering a small smile. "You've been here all night," she said gently. "You should take a break, get some rest." Emma shook her head. "I can't leave them," she said firmly. "Not yet." Lucy glanced at the incubator, her expression filled with quiet sympathy. "I understand," she said softly, "but you're doing all you can. Sometimes, that's all we can give." Emma sipped the coffee absently, her hands trembling slightly. Her gaze never wavered from the incubator. The smallest kitten had become a symbol of everything she feared and hoped for. Fragile, yet full of potential, if only it could hang on. As the first rays of dawn broke through the clinic windows, Dr. Harper returned with an update on the other two kittens. "The gray tabby is responding well to treatment," he said, his voice tinged with cautious optimism. "Its body temperature is almost normal, and its heart rate is steady. The black and white one is eating a little, which is a very good sign." Emma smiled faintly, relief washing over her. "That's wonderful," she said. "But what about?" Her voice trailed off as she gestured toward the orange kitten. Dr. Harper's expression turned somber. He walked over to the incubator, opening the small hatch to check on the kitten. He pressed 2 fingers gently to its chest, feeling for a heartbeat. Emma held her breath, her hands gripping the edge of her chair. Finally, he sighed and turned to face her. "It's very faint," he said quietly. "But it's there." Emma exhaled shakily, tears streaming down her face. "Then there's still hope," she said, her voice trembling. "We just need to give it more time." Dr. Harper nodded, though his expression remained cautious. "Time is what it needs, but we're running out of it. If it doesn't start showing signs of improvement soon, its chances—" He didn't finish the sentence, but Emma understood. Her heart clenched painfully as she watched the tiny kitten, its fragile chest rising and falling so faintly she could barely see it. The hours crept by, each one feeling like an eternity. Emma stayed by the incubator, whispering words of encouragement to the kitten, willing it to fight. She thought of all the stray animals she had taken in over the years, each one a testament to resilience and survival. "You're just like them," she murmured. "You're a fighter. I know you are." As the sun climbed higher in the sky, a small sound broke the silence. A faint, almost imperceptible meow. Emma's head snapped up, her heart leaping in her chest. She leaned closer to the incubator, her hands trembling as she peered inside. The orange tabby had moved. It was slight, just the tiniest twitch of a paw, but it was enough to send a surge of hope coursing through her. "Dr. Harper," she called, her voice shaking with excitement. "It moved! It's alive!" Dr. Harper and Lucy rushed over, their faces lighting up as they saw the kitten stir. Dr. Harper opened the incubator and gently lifted the kitten into his hands. He placed a stethoscope against its chest, his brow furrowing in concentration. "The heartbeat is stronger," he said, a note of amazement in his voice. "It's weak, but it's stronger than before." Emma covered her mouth with her hands, her tears flowing freely. "I knew it," she whispered. "I knew you could do it." Dr. Harper carefully placed the kitten back into the incubator, adjusting the settings to keep it comfortable. "We're not out of the woods yet," he said, though his tone was warmer now. "But this little one just might have a chance." Lucy grinned, wiping a tear from her own cheek. "That's the miracle we were waiting for." Emma sat back in her chair, her exhaustion finally catching up with her. But for the first time in hours, she felt a sense of peace. The orange tabby was fighting, and so was she. No matter what happened next, she knew she had done everything she could. For the first time that night, she allowed herself to smile. The days following the kitten's rescue were a whirlwind of care, hope, and emotional moments. The orange tabby's miraculous recovery had sparked a renewed sense of determination in everyone at the clinic. Emma refused to leave until she was certain all 3 kittens were out of danger, and even Dr. Harper, usually reserved and professional, found himself checking on them more frequently than necessary. Emma had named the gray tabby Hope, a fitting choice given the heart-shaped marking on his chest that had caught her attention the night she found them. The black and white kitten, energetic and mischievous even in its weakened state, had been dubbed Patches for the irregular splotches of black fur dotting its white coat. And the orange tabby, the smallest and most fragile of the trio, Emma had named Ember, a reminder of the tiny spark of life that had somehow survived against all odds. Each kitten had its own personality, which became more evident as they began to recover. Hope was the leader of the group, his curious nature leading him to explore the confines of the clinic's recovery room. He was the first to attempt climbing the small makeshift ramp Lucy had built for them, his tiny paws clumsily gripping the surface as he scrambled to the top. Patches, true to his name, was the troublemaker. He had an uncanny ability to wiggle out of even the snuggest blankets, much to Lucy's frustration and amusement. More than once, Emma found him perched on top of the heating pad, looking immensely proud of himself for escaping his intended resting spot. And then there was Ember. Though still the smallest and quietest of the trio, he had a determination that rivaled his siblings. He took longer to warm up to human touch, but when he finally nestled into Emma's lap for the first time, purring softly, it felt like a victory for them both. The story of the kittens quickly spread through the small town. Lucy, unable to keep the miraculous tale to herself, had shared it with a friend, and soon the local news picked it up. A reporter from the town's newspaper came to the clinic to interview Dr. Harper, Emma, and Lucy, and the article that followed captured the hearts of everyone who read it. Donations began pouring into the clinic, along with offers to adopt the kittens. Emma found herself overwhelmed by the outpouring of love from the community. People dropped off blankets, kitten formula, and tiny toys, many of them accompanied by handwritten notes of encouragement. One note in particular stood out to Emma. It was from an elderly woman who lived a few streets over, written in neat, looping cursive. The letter recounted how the woman had rescued her own cat from a snowstorm many years ago. "I hope these kittens bring you the same joy my sweetie brought me," it read. Attached to the note was a small knitted blanket, just the right size for a kitten. Emma smiled as she placed it in the kitten's bed. Adoption inquiries poured in, and Emma realized she would have to make a decision soon. Though the thought of parting with the kittens tugged at her heart, she knew she couldn't keep all three. She also knew that the right homes were out there, waiting for them. Hope was the first to find his new family. A young couple with a toddler had come to the clinic, their eyes lighting up when they saw him. The little girl squealed with delight as Hope batted at the edge of her scarf, his tiny claws catching the fabric. "He's perfect," the mother said, her voice soft with affection. Emma felt a bittersweet pang as she handed him over, but seeing the joy on their faces made it easier. Patches was next. A retired man who had recently lost his own cat came to the clinic, drawn by the story he had read in the paper. "I wasn't sure I was ready for another," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "But then I saw his picture. I think we're meant to be." When Patches climbed onto the man's lap and promptly fell asleep, Emma knew it was true. That left Ember. Emma had known from the beginning that she couldn't part with the tiny orange kitten who had fought so hard to survive. He had become a part of her life in a way that felt different from the others. His quiet strength mirrored her own, and the bond they had formed was undeniable. One evening, as Emma sat by the fire in her small living room, Ember curled up in her lap, purring softly. She thought about how much her life had changed in just a few days. The storm that had brought the kittens into her life now felt like a distant memory, replaced by the warmth and light they had brought with them. She reached down to stroke Ember's soft fur, her fingers brushing against the tiny knitted blanket the elderly woman had sent. "You're home now," she whispered, "and you're safe." The next day, Emma visited Dr. Harper to thank him for everything he had done. As they chatted in his office, she noticed a framed photo on his desk. It was of the 3 kittens taken during their first week at the clinic. "A reminder," he said, noticing her gaze, "of why we do what we do." Emma smiled. "They reminded me, too," she said, "of how much good there still is in the world." Over the weeks and months that followed, Emma stayed in touch with the families who had adopted Hope and Patches, exchanging photos and stories about the kittens' antics. The community, inspired by the story, rallied around the clinic, organizing fundraisers and volunteer efforts to support animal rescue. And Ember? He thrived in his new home, growing stronger and more playful with each passing day. Emma often found him perched on the windowsill, watching the world outside with a quiet curiosity. On snowy nights, he would curl up by the fire, his orange fur glowing in the flickering light, a living testament to the resilience of life and the power of compassion. For Emma, the kitten's survival was more than just a miracle. It was a reminder that even in the harshest of winters, warmth and love could still be found, and that every life, no matter how small, deserved a chance.